being in Massachusetts with access to FanDuel, where you could just be like, screw it, I'll bet on the NBA draft. I was looking at the odds, and I've kind of settled on a hot draft take opinion, Russillo. Would you be shocked if Clingan was just the number one pick?
Not even close to being shocked.
Okay, so as we're taping this, he's 15-1 on FanDuel to be the number one pick. And I've talked to some NBA people the last couple weeks, and especially in person this week. And it feels like he's the only one in this top 5 that people are like, I at least know what that guy is. And I wonder if that just trumps all the other stuff in this draft. Because like we talked a couple weeks ago about the way to think of this draft is just to slice off, pretend there's a top 7 that already got drafted, and now we're starting at number 8. And when in a normal draft where you slice the top 7 off and you get to number 8, teams start drafting a little more toward need than they do for best player available. The point is that I'm not sure there is a best player available, and Clingan is just shot blocker. He's been really successful. He won a state title in high school. He's won 2 in UConn, although the first time he was a bench guy. And you kind of know what he is. So you don't think it's crazy either?
No, I'd say in the conversations that I've had about the draft, which are still somewhat limited, but it's a more fun draft to talk about with teams only because they'll be like, why do you guys all think this? And that happens every year, but not like this. And I try to remind everybody like, hey, I'm not in charge of everything. So, and I don't even have a mock draft up, but that's your point, is that there's a lot of teams that they don't have to be tasked with the actual decision of who to take 1 or who to take 2, but it feels like there's this growing momentum of a lot of teams being like, man, the buzz is that these mocks are just assuming Sar Rissache in this way that it's not even close to their boards. And I guess this was starting to happen at the combine a little. Now, I know the counter to this is always a really simple one. It's like, well, it's easy to do that when you know you don't have to worry about the pick. And then when you have the pick, it's a little bit different. But it gets back to the great Neil O'Shea line where he was like, if there were no mocks, the drafts would actually play out much differently. But it becomes consensus. You decide to go outside the box. And then if you're wrong outside the box, your owner's like, what are you doing? Why did you take that guy 2 years later? So you're absolutely right. Like, based on what you're saying with this, I feel like the draft is the most exciting thing because not because of the talent, but because of like a lot of just underlying like, hey, you guys are assuming way too much in the media.
Right. So I look at like Phillies at number 16, and normally it'd be like number 16, maybe. In this draft, number 16 you end up getting a top 5 guy because there's going to be so many misses, right? There's going to be it's the number 7 pick might just be a complete bust. The number 10 pick might be a complete bust. But the way I was thinking about the draft was those NFL drafts where you kind of know a quarterback's going to go 3rd, but the team that's picking 3rd, it doesn't make sense for them to pick, but you kind of know just looking at it, well, somebody's going to trade up then and take him because somebody's going to want him. And I feel that way about Clingan. So the more I watch him and the more I read about the draft, and it's just like, you know what he is. If you're a team like OKC and you could just move up from 12-1 with assets and just be like, all right, we get this guy. This is kind of what we need, and we'll overpay for it a little bit. Or Houston could move up from 3-1, but he just seems like the sure. I look at Sar, like Sar didn't even average 10 points a game in New Zealand. The French swingman, who knows? That guy was like in an offensive funk for most of the year until the last month. So a lot of the stuff doesn't pass the sniff test to me. Like Sheppard, really good college shooter for 1 year. It's a 30-game sample size, but he's 6'1.5. And we hit the playoffs every year where those guys just get routinely hunted. I find it hard to believe he's going to be the number 1 pick. So you just start crossing guys off, and then it's like, all right, could Clingan be Gobert-ish? Like, maybe, right? Possibly, sort of.
Yeah, the rim protection in college is unbelievable, and you would just love to see some shooting from him, but he took 9 threes his entire career. So then you go, okay, well, can he develop that? But the free throw percentage is at 56% for his career. Ooh. So usually that's something with someone where you're like, hey, the 3 or the overall field goal percentage outside of the paint isn't that great, but the free throw shooting percentage is something teams constantly talk about that. And with Clingan, I think it's just a simple like, okay, well, at least to your point, he can move around. on defense. He was unbelievable at the rim in college. I mean, it was hilarious watching Illinois be like, I think we're going to get this guy in foul trouble. And you're like, you guys need another plan. Like, he's destroying you at the rim every single time. And I think OKC is interesting, one, because they could just pay it. And I don't know if Presti would be like, well, I know I can probably do whatever I want to do with any transaction, but do I just overpay because I have a surplus of picks? Well, if they evaluate him that way, like, what's the point? What's the point of like, oh, we got rid of a 26 first? And I felt like this was a bit of an overpay. Memphis has been mentioned a lot with Clingan too. But,
which I like that one too. Memphis is at 9. And the other thing is these teams can trade up in stages, right? Like Atlanta could say to them, we don't want to fall below 4 or we don't want to fall below 5. And OKC or Memphis would be like, cool, because Detroit is at 5. They don't know what to do. They don't want to take another young guy. So maybe we've tried to flip spots with them, get to 5, and then we can give you 5 plus more stuff. The thing with Clingan, I was even thinking about it going to the finals game on Thursday, where it's just, what's really good sometimes? Having a tall guy who can threaten some shots. And if we're at the point in this draft where I'm not positive what everybody's super elite skill is, and he has the best track record, I mean, him going against Edey in the NCAA tournament and doing really well against him, I think was important. I also think now granted, I'm not Mr. College Basketball, but I did watch a lot of stuff because I was bored on a plane. He does have good hands. He's not clumsy, right?
No, he can catch
good hands,
a lot of this stuff.
And he knows
in
where to
traffic.
go. Yeah, he knows how to put his hands up. And maybe that's enough. And maybe for this draft, it's kind of like having the game manager quarterback where you're like, he manages a game. Cool. Okay.
It's tough for the other two guys too, because like when you watch Sarr, granted his overall numbers aren't great because he played 17 minutes a game for Perth and he just wasn't taking a ton of shots. But when you watch him run, you go, oh my God. Like, look at this guy. Like, they don't make a lot of guys. There's not a lot of human beings that are running around like this dude. On top of the 3-point shooting percentages weren't great, but he was taking them. It was something, at least with him, where he sees himself 19 years old now, like developing it out. And whenever you're watching him or even Russillo, who you're like, man, this guy can really, like, some of the catch and shoot stuff is really good. And look how big he is. And look how he runs the floor, even though I think he plays a little bit smaller than he is. And so when you're watching him as like prospects, you go, oh, wow, like I could see Sarr, but you're constantly thinking about him as like the 8th or 9th pick.
Yeah.
And that's why it kind of sucks for both guys, because when you're watching him as potential first, you're going, like, Zach he's a really smart player. There's some really cool small stuff that he does, the way he's screening off the ball and the way he comes back around to it. But I was like, he's not really, like, if you're going to be the number 1 pick and you're going to be this good, and I'm looking at you as a scorer beyond just the shooting, it's like, I'd love to see you create a little bit more off the dribble. And you're like, that is not based, I'm still pretty limited in what I've watched, but you just don't see a lot of it. And then you're right. Like, Sarr, you get lost. Like, you throw in one of the games, you're like, oh, I have to wait for him to come off the bench in one of these. So,
well, and the other thing with Sarr, they do the best thing and the worst thing about him is he feels like he's a guard trapped in a big man's body. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, you know what? I don't consider that a positive. I don't really want a guard trapped in a big man's body. I'd rather just have a big man who knows he's a big man. But that's what's funny about talking about drafts like this. And this is why I'm being really careful about, this is just like blink test, me reading this stuff, watching highlights, and just having this 50-year experience of what works and doesn't work in the draft. And I just think when you get closer to the draft, teams get more and more comfortable with, I actually know what that is. And that's what they take over, like, man, I hope this is it. We've seen the most mistakes happen when people keep their fingers crossed and go, Darko, you should have seen this workout he had. It was amazing. And it's just all like hypothetical. When you're just drafting on hypothetical in the top 3 or 4, gets super dicey. Even Edwards. And that was such a weird year because there was no tournament and it was a COVID year. Nobody got to work him out. But he was still, one of the biggest high school prospects. He still had a good college year, right? That there was at least some things to point to. This Sarr, like, I just don't know how you evaluate that. It's fucking crazy. There's job protection pieces to it too, where it's like, if you're wrong, now your owner's just fucking side-eyeing you. Like, we took this Sarr guy. He's in the G League. Thanks for that one. So I don't know. I think this stuff factors in.
if you're a good GM, you're golfing with your owner all the time. You're just in that first tee box and you're just going, man, this draft is weird. It's the weirdest draft. You're just working him
right.
for
You're
weeks.
Like, I just hope we get a player, right? I don't even, it's 50-50. The guy will even be in a rotation for us.
But think about the instinct of like survival. And just to be fair to like Sarr coming off the bench, there's plenty of international guys back in the day too. And it would always be funny because the scouts would go to watch some international guy. And then sometimes the coaches would get really weird about the attention. It's almost like a Caitlin Clark thing. Where they'd be like, this guy who's like the 8th best player on our team, but you guys are going to draft him in the lottery because he's 6'10" and he's 18 years old. Well, like, right. I'm not going to play him in the second half now. And there were a lot of guys that you looked at when you were getting ready for the draft. You're like, that's weird. He doesn't really even start. So it's not like Sarr's the first guy ever.
That's the Marvin Williams corollary. Remember, he couldn't start on North Carolina. And it was like, oh, Atlanta's probably going to take him second. And all of us were like, what? Based on the potential.
Yeah, but he was pretty good.
I get it, but it was just I want you to be able to start for your own team in college.
Yeah, but wasn't Booker off the bench?
Was he? I don't remember that. I thought he played big minutes though. Did he? I thought he was like 26 minutes a game for them.
Look, Marvin was the same thing, but I'm double checking.
Yeah, but they took him over Chris Paul. That's where it fell apart.
Yeah, right. That's obviously.
It's like I'm positive Chris Paul is good. Watching basketball, that guy's going to be in the league for a long, long time. The Reed Sheppard one is the other one that is.
Yeah, Booker came off the bench. He played 20 minutes a game. So I'm just pointing it out because I remember like it can't be a hard and fast rule, and there's almost no hard and fast rule in sports.
I'll give that
as well, but. Look, I liked Marvin, and when you watch Devin, you're like, "Wow, this guy looks like he's pretty good."
Booker didn't go second, though.
No, but it's every time we talk about these guys, you're just going to come back around to like, I can't believe I have to take one of them. But that's kind of where we started, though. Think about where we started this whole thing, where I think you and I are both hearing from teams that it's like, don't start writing this stuff down in pen, because it seems like there's been this Sarr Zach back and forth 1 or 2 deal. And then the questions are at 3. Can it be Castle at 3? Can it be Clingan or 3? Which I think Clingan probably feels like the hottest name of like, be ready for maybe something a little bit weird. But I kind of can't wait now. I can't wait because I think we might be in for some big surprises.
It's like a bad NFL draft because the other one that I like who for number 1, who is way down there, he's 100 to 1 on FanDuel. I don't understand that, is Castle. Because Castle's another one where you're like, I know what this guy is. I don't know what the ceiling of it is, but worst case scenario, I know what it is. I know he could be on a really good team. I know he would be able to defend. There's some point guard upside with him. There's some, maybe he was used incorrectly offensively in Connecticut because how good they were, and on a different team, there might be more there. But worst case scenario, I get somebody who's just a really good athlete who can defend multiple positions and switch and do all the things I need to do if I'm winning. And maybe that's enough for this draft, 100 to 1. You're less bullish on that
one. Well, I love the payout on it. The Castle part, and I know you didn't mean to say incorrectly because you can't be like, oh, they used him wrong when they win another title and they just didn't need him offensively. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. So I'm not like trying to correct you like a French Open broadcast, but when you have Spencer and you have Newton, there wasn't really going to be an opportunity for Castle to be a point guard. And that's been the thing that his group has been banging the drum on throughout the entire pre-draft process, is that he's a point guard. He's a point guard. And I don't know if it's because they're trying to, I don't know how many people would scare away in this draft. Like his floor is probably 5, right? Now, he's had some nice offensive games, but I'll admit what we saw, it never looked like a point guard. It didn't. And I didn't watch his high school stuff, so I'm not informed to just cross it out. But even in the times that he had the ball at UConn, I'm like, wait, this guy's a point guard? And it was funny because I was talking to...
Well, let's be honest. He's not a point guard. I think he feels like he can play point guard.
Right.
I think both of us are aligned where you're either a point guard or you're not. You can't talk me into thinking you might be a point guard. But I think his point is he probably wants to be able to handle the ball more than he did.
Because I started thinking about like the bigger guys, and I don't want to just come up with a list that makes it sound like I'm right while I'm omitting some other people. But if you think about the history of these bigger guards that are like, actually, I'm a point guard. You're like, what do you mean? Like Chris Dunn? or Emmanuel Mudiay or Jarrett Culver? Does it work out a lot? Iguodala was a really interesting one. So if Castle's Iguodala, then he should go number one.
That's the thing.
But I think we saw more from Iguodala.
What if Castle's like slightly poor man's Iguodala?
Yeah, he may have just had Spencer and Newton and Caravan and Clingan and all these unbelievable players. Maybe they were just all in his way. But I watched a lot of UConn, and I never thought pre-draft we'd be hearing, "Oh no, he's actually just a point guard." Again, I didn't watch the high school stuff, but I've seen plenty of guys that said they were point guards in high school, and it's like, were you, or were you just the guy who scored all the time because you had the ball and you were that much better than everybody else because you're going to be a lottery pick in 2 years?
Well, do the exercise again. Cut out the top 7 picks. Pretend there's a top 7 ahead of everyone in this draft, and the first pick is the 8th pick, et cetera, et cetera. And Castle going 9th in a normal draft would seem totally reasonable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some of these guys I really like at 7 or 8 or 9.
Right. The Reed Sheppard's the other one that's fun because the shooting stats are amazing. He puts together a great mixtape. His worst case scenario is 15 years from now. There's an incredible Reed Sheppard was a problem! Mixtape of all his Kentucky and some of his crunch time stuff. But I don't think he's Peyton Pritchard. But my question would be how much better than Peyton Pritchard is he? And that's what I'd want to know if I was going to take him with like the 3rd pick in this draft, right? Is he a bench guy? Is he a starting point guard? Do you feel like he could be a poor man Steve Nash? Do you feel like he can play off the ball with a bigger guard? I just have questions.
I love that you're talking about him as if he's not as good as Peyton Pritchard.
But that's the other question is, what if he's just Peyton Pritchard? Would you take Peyton Pritchard with the 3rd pick in this draft? Probably not.
I don't know that people loved it when Ainge took him when he took him the first time around. So he measured out all right, probably what you expected, just under 6'2". I mean, the shooting, you want to talk about somebody else coming off the bench that's going to go really high. I mean, he only started 5 games in college.
Yeah.
And the shooting numbers are just so absurd that I think this is where you look at the Spurs and go, can we get a shooter and a wing? Can we get a shooter and a wing? That's what's so crazy. Imagine if San Antonio had won the lottery. Maybe do they put Clingan next to Wembanyama to say we're just going to put another body? But then are you actually worried about him getting in the way? Or you can't imagine that they'd want to put Sarr with him. I don't know.
No,
I don't know what San Antonio
I feel like they
would have
want.
done. Right.
Don't you feel like they just want wings who can handle the ball a little bit, throw an entry pass?
Entry passes would be
compliment Wemby. Just be able to get the ball to him and be able to switch on defense would be the only 2 things. Everything else would be a bonus at that point. Can you switch on D? Can you throw a pass?
Do you think the entry pass is going to become the 300 game winner in baseball? Like we'll track the last guy that could throw an entry pass?
All this Bill Walton stuff was running over the last couple weeks. And there was a couple like Bird just throwing an entry pass to Walton and then cutting around him. And I was more impressed just like the entry pass, how he would bounce it, get him at the certain thing. It feels like just a lost art. But also nobody posts up anymore. So maybe nobody knows how to throw it.
I'm really glad you said that because I didn't want to sound as old as we just sounded during those last 30 seconds. Because if nobody's in the post to throw it to, why am I? But it would have been nice for Embiid at times. It would have been nice to not have it be Sohan trying to do it.
You know what the new version of the entry pass is the Tatum Luka type posting up at the foul line and throwing that little bounce pass when they have their the guy on their back would be the other one.